and talk about. But we were talking about the omega point, and I know we looked at some of the works of physicist Paul Davies. And, you know, what the omega point is, or the 0 point, it's a time that is a natural time. It's just like, you know, whether it be warming and cooling or whatever, there's nature involved in it. Nature's going to do it, you know. Nature is intelligent. That's one of the things that I think a lot of people just are never able to grasp, that when you talk about dealing with nature, you're not talking about dealing with a piece of metal or a piece of plastic. You're talking about dealing with an intelligence. When you deal with the earth, you're dealing with a living thing. The same way that hair grows out of your living head, trees grow out of a living earth. You know, it's alive. And nature is, it has a plan, and we'll get to that today. Even right out of the Big Bang, when that happened, built into it was a plan as to exactly how and when things were going to happen. And the omega point is built in. It's type of an energy factor, an intelligent energy factor of nature that says, look, you're going to go this far, and then we're going to slow things down, and we're going to shake things up a bit to give time for you to digest what you've done right, what you've done wrong, and in other words, to put it simply, to give time for wisdom to catch up with your knowledge. I mean, come on, you can go back millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years, and we really didn't start inventing anything until, what, 100 years ago. But then look what's happened. One thing builds on the back of another. Somebody invents a telephone. Well, you know, then it goes on, and you've got telephones in houses, and you got phone booths, and now look what you've got. You got telephones that take movies and yeah, all kinds of crazy stuff. And the idea of a 0 point or an omega point is borne out by what Pakel Votan said when he predicted December 21st, 2012. He says, you know, what's going to happen, folks, is that you're going to get so consumed in the technological aspects of your life, the industrialization of the earth. You're going to get so consumed in the profits and so forth and so on that you're going to lose your interdependence and your interconnectedness with nature. And that's what's going to cause the shaking. And you see it. Whether it be global warming. I have people, you know, one guy particularly writes me, he says, well, you know, yeah, there's global warming, but it's not man-made, and you're crazy for saying it's man-made. It's not man-made. Global warming is absolutely natural. But here's the problem. When you have a natural event like global warming, say, let's take it back and say maybe you had it 500 years ago, 400, 300 years ago. Well, global warming was global warming. It was a natural event. But now, when it's time for global warming to come again, on top of it, you have all of this industrial pollutants into the ozone, all the carbon dioxide. So global warming gets multiplied far beyond what it normally should be. And this is where the threat comes from. You know, you wonder, are the oceans going to rise like they say? Have you read about the island off of India? It's an island small island off the coast of India and Pakistan, I think. And India and Pakistan have been fighting about this island for years. And each country is saying, it's ours. Well, it's gone. It's nobody's. The ocean has risen and the island is gone. And I was reading where an Indian scientist there said, well, the argument between India and Pakistan has been settled by global warming. Indeed, it was a very clear picture of the ocean rising. And so we get to this situation here of talking about the omega point, or the point where nature has to involve itself and say, you know what, we're going to slow things down. Now is the time when we're going to stop you because you're not using wisdom alongside with your knowledge. Oh, you know how to make planes, and planes are good to take people to different places, but you also decided that you've got to use them to drop bombs. Oh, and nuclear energy can turn on a lot of lights, but it can also incinerate cities. And so, the wisdom is not to use things like that. We have factory farming where now we're taking the animals that are given for food and we're torturing them to death. We're cramming them on top of one another so we can turn out more and more. And we're filling them with antibiotics, and you're eating the antibiotics every day. And now the scientists at Johns Hopkins University says, you know what, we're scared because what's going to happen is that there's going to be a virus and antibiotics are not going to be able to stop it because you're neutralizing them by eating this stuff. And so what does that mean? It means we violate nature and we cause a catastrophe. Nature didn't cause the catastrophe. We did. See? So the omega point stands out, and many believe that it is December the 21st, 2012, when Pakel Votan said would be the culmination of the great shaking, the great change from the onslaught of greed and industrialization to a time where the mind, the mass mind, will have to be turned back more to nature and to more of a peaceful state. So someone has to apply the brakes. It's like a wheel spinning so fast that it just flies off. I mean, somebody has to apply the brakes. And so we have to think to ourselves, well then, could December the 21st, 2012 be the omega point? The need to change course is obvious because the speed and direction of the current mind, given the technological advances, creates a threat to the entire universe, including ourselves. And so you get to the point where you say, well, nature has to step in. Somebody has to step in, or not somebody, but nature has to step in and say, hey, wait a minute, An intelligent mind, which is nature, God, if you want to call it. An intelligent mind created from the very beginning, saying, now wait a minute here, let's set up a point where we have to stop their progress, meaning our progress. And we have to alter their consciousness. And we have to redirect the movement to take what has been achieved and insert a new wisdom mindset that will continue progress free of the obsessive profit and greed motive, which is responsible now in factory farming for torturing the animals and is responsible for dumping the pollutants into the universe and into the ozone and so forth. Now, the profit motive was necessary. There's no doubt about that. But, that was what propelled the interest in creating new advances. But now it's becoming more important to the mind than the advances themselves. See, it just doesn't become that important to industry as to what they're doing to the animals, what they're doing to nature. I mean, they got to increase the cash flow. The bottom line has to increase. So something has to be reshaped. Something has to be modified. Something has to slow down so that the created aspects, things that we have created, are allowed to function for good, and not for things that will jeopardize the health of not only ourselves but of the planet. So once that's been established, the profit can be restored. The profit motives can be restored. But there will be the introduction of a more wise mind that says, hey, wait a minute, we did some bad things before, and we upset nature, so we've got to do things differently, see? And so then our creative minds will be guided more closely by this mind change that is developing right now, right as you said, right as you're sitting watching this. We are all caught up in this shaking of the universe, in the weather, in the warming, in the storms and so forth. And of course, we've always had those things, but they're on top of one another. We never had them before at a time when we were moving so close to this Aquarian change. That didn't happen but 26,000 years ago. And it's going to happen in a couple of years. And that's the other point. I want to get back to Paul Davies, the physicist that spoke to us last time. We studied some stuff with Paul Davies. But look at how he talks about the universe. And you know, let's follow along with him for a bit, okay? He says, the oscillating universe suffers from physical problems associated with old universes. Each new cycle of expansion and contraction is sort of a new deal in which the physical conditions are scrambled randomly. You know what's interesting to me about that is when he talks about a new cycle of expansion and contraction of the universe. And I think of ourselves. Each breath is a new cycle of expansion and contraction. You think of the heart. Each beat is an expansion and a contraction, you know. And so we're finding out that as we fit in harmony with the universe, we can't step away from that, because once we do, then we set ourselves up for really serious problems, because we're out of sync with nature itself. We're out of harmony with ourselves. Look what Davies says here. Some physicists have speculated that the highly compressed cosmos, rather than imploding to a space-time singularity, will bounce to an enormous density and a new cycle of expansion and contraction. A new cycle of expansion and contraction. See? When he says, you know, the universe is oscillating, he's saying like it's moving back and forth, you know. It's alive, you know. So we're flowing in this harmony of expansion and contraction. And so any kind of a 0 point or an omega point of December 21st, 2012 would affect not only the very living, breathing universe we are a part of, but the quantum, photon, and atomic structures that we ourselves are, you know. I've said this, you know, so many times, and it still is hard for a lot of people to understand. You're a machine. I mean, your body is like a robot, but somebody has to operate that robot. And that's you, the photon, the invisible quantum mind, the photon inside of the body that causes its parts to move, the machine to move, say. And so what are we caught up in? We may not know it, but we're caught up in a life dance. The oscillating universe, the oscillating human being, the oscillating and contracting and expanding breath, the oscillating and contracting and expanding heart, and all of these things. So here we are. We're part of the same rhythm of the universe itself. And that's why Paco Voto warned us. He said, don't lose your interconnectedness with nature. You're part of it. You breathe like it. You expand like it. You contract like it. Don't get yourself out of sync, see? And that's what Paul Davies was saying. There's everything is built like in a geometric pattern. The very first cells that appear in you as a fetus are the 64 tetrahedron. You know, the kind of the three-dimensional Star of David. That's the shape of the very first cells of your fetal body. See? And so Paul Davies says, you know, there's a mathematical basis for all this. That's what Nassim Haramein, remember a few sessions ago, we discussed about Nassim Harameyn's discussion about the self-replicating 64 tetrahedron, how in that one same pattern it gets smaller and smaller and then bigger and bigger. And what that basically was saying is things happen by themselves. Not because, oh, well, it's just the way things are. No, they have to. There's a plan. There's a rhythm. From the very first time, when the Big Bang exploded, it was all built in intelligently, exactly what had to happen. So December the 21st, 2012 is a mathematical necessity. Oh, yes, it is. In the geometric patterns that are going to align themselves between the constellations Ophiuchus, Sagittarius, and Scorpio, at that point, that's when the sun will be aligned with the center of the Milky Way galaxy, which is ours, for the first time in 26,000 years. See? So the question is, this necessity, this mathematical necessity, is it based on something other than simple movement that's governed by gravity? In other words, things move and up and down and all over. I mean, is that just because of gravity or, by different celestial bodies? Paul Davies, in the next slide we're going to look at, he quotes Sir James Jeans, who once said, God is a mathematician. So that's why the ancient geometric patterns, and those like we see in crop formations, that's why they hold such interest. At least they should hold such interest, because that's the basis of all nature. I mean, the Greeks knew that in their geometric patterns and Vesica Piscis and all of these kind of things. Even the Christ symbol of the Vesica Piscis, the fish, and so forth. And so it's all geometry, because inside of your body, all the cells are geometric patterns, and if something is a wrong pattern, it can't interact with the pattern next to it, and you have dis-ease. Things go wrong. And that's what Davies is saying now, is that these mathematics, these formations, these patterns, geometric patterns, brings us back to a need for the universe itself to slow the process of our minds down, because we don't realize that we're upsetting these patterns. We don't realize that there is a dance being played out by nature. Let's go back to Paul Davies. Here's what he says: mathematics is the poetry of logic. No expression of law can be more compelling than one based on simple logic. If as one believes all mathematics reduces to the mathematics of logic and all physics reduces to mathematics, what alternative is there but for all physics to reduce to the mathematics of logic? The one point, and not being a mathematician, but the one point that is interesting to me is the word logic. Come let us reason together. Be logical. And I guess that's what drove me, if anything drove me in this work some years ago, it was the fact that as I read through the Bible initially, it never seemed logical to me. I mean, it wasn't reasonable. There had to be a logical reason. There had to be something that was natural and that was purposeful. It couldn't be built. Nothing could be built on hocus pocus or faith or anything like that, because you live in an electric universe. You are an electrical appliance in an electric universe. Let's go back to Paul Davies. He says, could it be that the universe is the way it is because it is an inevitable consequence of logical necessity? Jean d'Alembert wrote, the entire creation would appear as a unique truth and necessity. If the universe is slowly choked to death by its own entropy, would God die too? Only a universe of cyclic varieties would appear to allow God to be infinite and eternal. Did you ever think of what, that point that was just made there? if the universe, by its own entropy, it changes. It just changes itself into nothing and disintegrates. Would that be the end of God? If there's nobody here, it is the end of God, isn't it? You know, but that doesn't make any sense. On the other hand, if the patterns change, and if it's Paul Davies, and if science is, and if Paco Votan in 2012 is saying, okay, it allows you to go so far to advance the cause of this particular planet, but then it has to stop you. It has to shake you. It has to slow you down until you allow wisdom to catch up to you. Then there is the cyclic varieties of the dance that nature and the universe go through, allowing God to be infinite and immortal, and I might add you infinite and immortal. So if you study that, and this logical picture that Davies presents to us brings us to an understanding of why such a course correction as predicted for December the 21st, 2012, is necessary. Everything fits into a mathematical equation. Everything is forms of geometric patterns in the universe. Things will not go off into crazy patterns that would be unsustainable. There's dark matter to push things out, and there's dark energy to hold them so they don't go out of sync altogether. So the mathematical forms that Davies was talking about allows one to assess the universe and reach a conclusion that, hey, wait a minute, this isn't all just a bunch of stuff flying off through the sky. This is logical and necessary. Logical necessity tells us that something, someone, has to control the constantly accelerating direction of a very violent universe. You know, if there wasn't something to control this violent universe, we'd have been destroyed eons ago. But here, we, on this planet, not only stand and watch as the universe itself passes through violent throes of all kinds of catastrophic things going on and explosions and so on, but we ourselves create violence, massive violence on this planet, atomic violence on this planet, the torture of nature and its living things, the obsession with greed and the need to profit, even at the expense of nature and our very lives. So it's just absolutely necessary that things change before we cause irreversible damage to nature and to ourselves. So a living universe which is not choked to death by its own changes would demand, as a necessary part of its own survival, that things going on that threaten it are modified. And that's where December the 21st, 2012 comes in. The living, breathing universe has to protect itself. That's extremely logical, isn't it? And it's extremely reasonable. And it's a reasonable explanation for December the 21st, 2012. And for all of the shaking. Now, you could say, well, do you believe in it? You don't have to ask anybody if you believe in December 21st, 2012. You feel it. You sense it. You know something is going on. You know things are more on edge than they ever were before. So we get to that 0 point, that omega point. That's what they call singularity. You can't go any further. Things have got to stop. The tetrahedron, which Nassim Haramein talked about, reduces to 1 point. The concept of ourselves going faster and faster technologically, building one thing on top of the other, advancing and advancing with no comparable wisdom to keep up with us, just advancing to make more. I mean, what do we do? Even in this country, what do we do? We've got to make so much money. We don't want to pay people that work here anymore. They may, we don't want to give them this money. We can exploit people in these other countries and pay them 30 cents an hour. And we can make more stuff and bring it over here. Doesn't make any difference who we hurt. Doesn't make any difference what economy is destroyed. Doesn't make any difference what we do to anything. And so then we ask ourselves, are we lawbreakers? Are we breaking the natural law? Let's go back to Paul Davies. He's going to talk about singularity and this point. A singularity is the interface between the natural and the supernatural. See that? Wow. In other words, here is the point. The omega, the zero, December 24th. That interface between the natural, us, and the supernatural, the quantum light. Call it God if you want, that's fine. Whatever you want to call it. But this higher natural force, it confronts us. It slams the door and it stands in front of that door and says to us, hey, knock it off. Slow it down. You're going too far, too fast. What comes out of singularity is either totally chaotic and unstructured, or is coherent and organized. That would mean the universe emerges with a degree of organization present, wound up and ready for action. Wow, think of that. The universe emerges with a degree of organization present, wound up and ready for action. So you have this nothing, and then you have this Big Bang, that's what it was, and you have this tremendous explosion, but not a chaotic nothing. It built into this is organization. In other words, it knows what it's going to do. It knows how long it's going to take for it to do what it has to do. And nothing is going to stop it. Nothing is going to change it. There is an ultimate question of existence. Physics can explain the origin and organization of the physical universe, but not the laws. Perhaps the laws will emerge to be the only logically possible physical principle. That's pretty neat. If you think about it, it's very neat. Physics can explain the origin and the organization of the universe, but not the laws. You know, when the Big Bang happened, what were the laws that were written into the Big Bang? What does it say if this will happen if this happens? You can't do this, you must do that, and so forth and so on. We don't know. We don't know. But we can see by what's happened that we have been violating the laws. And we can see by the predictions from NASA and from science and from physicists such as Michio Kaku telling us, hey, look out. Something's going to happen. And then, as Paul Davies says, perhaps the laws will emerge as the only logically possible physical principle. See, in other words, it's that it is the intelligence built in to things like creation and the Big Bang that say we're going to go this way, we're going to do this, and anything that starts to obstruct or starts to come against us, such as what people on earth are doing, this is what we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have to change it. So if December the 21st, 2012 is the 0 point, the omega point, the singularity, then according to Paul Davies, at that juncture, we reach a barrier, we reach a door that separates the natural from the supernatural. We run head first into what we call God. We reach the point in 2012 where what happens is ordained by a higher law, a law that we may have violated. And from the looks of things, it would seem that we did. And as Davies states, the structure which formed out of the Big Bang carried a coherence and an organization. It wasn't just, boom, everything flying off in different directions. It may look that way to the uneducated as we are, the primitive as we are, but it wasn't that way. You know, if that was the case and everything was just going off in crazy business, it would carry itself out to an evolution that would resist those things that nature is trying to do now, which means nature now is trying to cause us to slow down, to stop our breaking of natural law. But if everything was chaotic, nature wouldn't be doing what it's doing now. Because we're threatening the structure itself, and so, as Davy says, then the only logical principle must be the law of nature that says, hey, we're gonna shut you down for a while. So now when we ponder December the 21st, 2012, may we also ponder our assault on nature and our assault on life in all forms as a serious violation of the natural cosmic law, which must be addressed by a higher authority who enforces such laws. There's got to be an enforcer. There has to be the law. There has to be the judge. Which brings us to the mystery of 2012. Let me introduce you to a book called The Mystery of 2012. This book presents the thoughts of several writers relative to 2012. Writings by Greg Braden, Peter Russell, Daniel Pinchbeck, Joanna Macy, John Major Jenkins, and others. And for our studies here, I wanted to look at the comments in this book of Peter Russell. Okay, we've been studying the thoughts of Paul Davies, the physicist, concerning singularity, and I believe it's given us a better idea concerning the nature of a living, breathing universe that has a plan, that governs under a law that we may have violated, which would necessitate a zero or omega point or a December 21st, 2012 to slow us down or stop us. So from that book, The Mystery of December of 2012, Peter Russell will provide us with some insights concerning singularity as it relates, the 0 point as it relates to 2012. He comments on the question of singularity as it becomes a force that speeds up evolution. The accelerated evolution is what we are experiencing now. After so many thousands and thousands and thousands of years of, for the most part, inactivity, with nature itself evolving, suddenly our technological creativity finds us evolving along with nature, and unfortunately, it finds us evolving ourselves faster than nature. We're racing ahead of nature, and we're racing ahead of the wisdom that is needed to have us use our creativity in such a way that is beneficial to the universe. So that's what we're going to learn about here with Peter Russell, about the force that speeds up time, bringing the whole existence to this single omega point, which may be December 21st, 2012. Let me introduce you to Peter Russell from the book The Mystery of 2012, which you see there. Okay, Peter Russell was born in London, England, and in 1965 he was awarded an open exhibition to Gonville and Caius College in Cambridge to study mathematics. In 1969 he gained first-class honors in theoretical physics and experimental psychology. He then went to Rishikesh, India, where he trained as a teacher of transcendental meditation, and in 1971 he gained a postgraduate degree in computer science. From 71 to 74 he studied for a PhD on the psychophysiology of meditation at Bristol University. Boy, that's interesting, isn't it? A physicist who is deep into meditation. Now, that has to be interesting. And so what Peter Russell is going to talk with us about, or show us, is how everything is moving faster and faster and faster and moving ahead of the natural force, which means the natural force has to grab us and pull us back so that it may lead us the way nature is programmed to do. This is what he says. He says, where am I here? Oh, my goodness. Okay. Nope. All right, bear with me here for just a minute. And let me tell you what Peter Russell is saying. He's saying that calculations that used to take decades are now made in minutes. Communication that used to take months now happen in seconds. And he says this is a pattern that goes back to the dawn of life on Earth. Well, that's so true. You have to think of when, like, maybe the Pony Express was sending out messages. One horse would take it so many miles, and then the Pony Express rider would come with another horse, and he'd be going so many miles and so forth. Now all you got to do is push a button. Just all you have to do is just push your button, and off you go. I got caught up with this slide. Let's read the whole thing over again. Here's Peter Russell. Calculations that used to take decades are now made in minutes. Communications that used to take months now happen in seconds. This is a pattern that goes back to the dawn of life on Earth. First life forms 4 billion years ago. Multicellular life, 1 billion. Vertebrae, several hundred million years ago. Mammals, tens of millions. Hominids stood on the planet a couple of million years ago. Homo sapiens, a few 100,000 years ago. Language tools, tens of thousands of years ago. Civilization, a few thousand. Industrial revolution, just 300 years ago. Information revolution, a few decades. Each step happens sooner than the past. Each step happens sooner than the past. In other words, everything builds on something else. We build on top of each other. In other words, the early Babylonians made calculations, but probably the results would take years. Now it's minutes. Things are done now in seconds that used to take months or years. All you have to have is one finger and touch a key. Remember we used to have the Encyclopedia Britannica volumes on a wall, and you'd go looking through hundreds of books, and now you touch a button with a finger and it's all there. But what is interesting in the statement that Russell just made is how this acceleration works on life forms itself. In other words, it appears that our accelerating creativity is part of a natural cosmic evolution, okay, that formed billions of years ago. The point here is that all of us, you, me, everybody, we're swept up on this magic carpet called existence. Here we are. And what can we do? Well, nothing we can do, but we just get taken along for the ride. We're taken along on the wings of the wind wherever it's going. Where are we going to go? We're on the planet Earth. It's spinning around and traveling thousands of miles. We don't know. We just go on as if, there is no such place as in the middle of this tremendous void called the universe. We accelerate as life accelerates. It's not that we're learning so fast. It's that we're in the middle of a conscious activity that is existence, and we're moving faster and faster and faster, which sets up the intelligent universe to understand that the speed of this evolutionary creation has far outsped the evolutionary cycles of wisdom. In other words, the inmates are running the asylum. I think when you start to, if we just slow it for a second, if we start to think, I wonder what's he really talking about? He's talking about, here you have millions of years of the earth, hundreds of thousands of years, and you didn't invent a light bulb until 100 years ago. But then, from that point on, you invented everything. And now we've got things that years ago would have been considered to be miracles, things of God, televisions and all kinds of computers and, oh my God, all stuff. And so that's when Peter Russell says each new development stands on the shoulders of what came before. When it came to making computers, we didn't need to reinvent factories or global distribution systems. We already had that expertise. We just applied it to the production of computers. Each new phase requires a fraction of the time of the previous. 20 years ago, very few had any notion of the World Wide Web and how it would change our lives. And who knows what new breakthroughs will transform our lives in the immediate future. You see how things move faster and faster? Remember we used to, they had to build factories, they had to build distribution hubs, but then there's no need to do this. Now we just got to get the stuff that we want to make because we already have the distribution hubs, and so everything can just be made and zip off it goes. So the next creation flies into our existence much quicker than the one before. I like that point that Peter Russell made. What's coming next to transform our lives? I don't know if you watched the last DVD I sent out, but that was where in Japan they have this new type of iPod or whatever it is, that in order to change the volume, if you want the volume to go higher, you raise your eyes up. You want to lower it, you lower your eyes. You look to the left to change the signal. You look to the right. Can you imagine people walking down the street? They got things in their ears. They're talking. No, there's nobody there, but they're talking to a phone in their ear. And then they're moving their eyes up and down, left and right. And you see, and then you get to the point of where it says, I think I understand what they're talking about. We're saying the creation creates us. Our own creations have created us. Our own creations have changed us. And now we move and we act totally different based on the things that we've created. And so then we all sit and say, is that light blinking far off, getting a little brighter? Is that 2012? Is that what this is all about? Let's go back to Peter Russell. He says, are we heading to singularity where the rules change and things happen differently? Vernor Vinge and Ray Kurzweil in their book, Singularity is Near, say that if computer power keeps doubling every 18 months as it has done for 50 years, computers will be able to equal the performance of the human brain. Machines would then be able to design better ones and faster. What happens then? Would we then download our minds into computers? Would humans become obsolete? Isn't that what Pavel Votan said when we first read about his December 21st, 2012 prediction? The rules have to change to save us and to save the universe from us. And obviously, the rules have to change before machines begin to direct our next step. Before we have to download our minds into computers. Yeah, I know, I can just hear a lot of people, I never heard of such. No, you never did hear such. But you never heard of parallel universes. You never heard of the fact that you have duplicates of yourselves all over the universe. You never heard of that. And now you're hearing it from scientists, from physicists. And so Peter Russell says that we've got to do something before we become obsolete, or nature has to do something before we become obsolete. So is it not time for wisdom to be allowed to catch up to our creativity? See what Peter Russell says again. He says, evolution, whether human or machine, or a combination of the two, would continue at an ever-increasing pace. Time scales would shorten from decades to years to months to days. Before long, we approach zero, a true mathematical singularity. You see how it happens? I mean, we do it faster and faster and faster. We don't have to take years to do this. We don't have to take months to do this. We don't have to take weeks or days or hours or minutes. We do it instantly, and it's the omega point. The omega point. So is December 21st, 2012 the omega point? Peter Russell here is going to introduce us to Terence McKenna, and on the work that Terence McKenna did on the question of evolution to singularity or to the omega point. Terence McKenna was quite a character. Brilliant writer, very, very fascinating guy, who took psychedelic plants. He didn't take, what would you call it, drugs and that nature, but he took psychedelic plants because he had to get high and see the things that he said. Well, and a lot of people would say, I'm not into that. But if you knew how many of the great scientists of the world did this, even I forget what his first name was, but last name was Crick. He was the one who discovered the shape of DNA, and he admitted that he was high when he saw it. He said unless he had gotten high, he'd have never found that structure of DNA. But this is what Peter Russell, I'm going to introduce you to Terence McKenna. You'll see a picture of Terence. He died, incidentally. But I'll show you a picture. There's a picture of Terence McKenna on the left. And this is what Peter Russell had to say about Terence McKenna. Terence McKenna developed a mathematical function he called time wave to show new forms coming into existence. He showed how its shape repeats itself, but over shorter and shorter intervals. The curve shows a surge around 500 BC, the time of Plato, Buddha, Lao Tzu. A major influence then was being exerted. The same pattern appeared in the 60s, but 64 times faster. I'll tell you what's interesting to me about that. Remember when Nassim Haramein was talking about the 64 tetrahedron? The 64 tetrahedron is like a three-dimensional Star of David, but it is a pattern that is in what we think is invisible space. It is the pattern of the very first cells in a human body. And when he says 64 times faster, from the time of Buddha and Lao Tzu to the 1960s, look at what else he says here. In 2012, the pattern repeats again, but again 64 times faster. McKenna's precise date for time wave zero was December 22nd, 2012. At that time, he did not know of the Mayan calendar ending one day earlier. And McKenna then passed away in the year 2000. Terence McKenna did not know about the Mayan, well, actually the Packel-Votan prediction of December 21st, 2012 to be the 0 point. Okay, so when he worked out his singularity formula, he brought it to December the 22nd, one day, and never had any knowledge about the December 21st date made by the Packel-Votans. So the question I have, and I haven't resolved this yet, but is if the 64 times faster element is connected to Nassim Haramein's 64 tetrahedron, which also replicates itself smaller and smaller and smaller until it reaches that singularity or 0 point which is the omega point, or December the 21st, 2012. Yeah, Terence McKenna, he was quite a character. Gifted writer, and one who believed in taking, as I said, these natural plant-based hallucinogens. He believed, and when I move off the subject just a little bit, because I want to talk to you about it, but he believed that the plants were made for the purpose of putting people into contact with the higher in a natural way. And I'll tell you something. You know, and you can be as holy as you want and have all of this hocus pocus. The food of the gods, the angel food, the manna in the desert was magic mushrooms. I'll show you that a little while later as we go along here. But the Bible is filled with this, and when you heard of people seeing stairways going up into the clouds, or people seeing angels and all that, they were higher than a kite. Which is not to say that those things don't exist. They do, but in another dimension, in a parallel dimension. Terence McKenna died of a very aggressive form of brain cancer. He was told he had about 4 months to live, and he gave an interview. That was back in 1999. And I want to share that interview with Terence McKenna with you. This is what he said. He said, "I always thought death would come on the freeway in a few horrifying moments, so you'd have no time to sort it out. Having months and months to look at it and think about it and talk to people and hear what they have to say, it's kind of a blessing. It's certainly an opportunity to grow up and get a grip and sort it all out. Just being told by an unsmiling guy in a white coat that you're going to be dead in 4 months definitely turns on the lights. It makes life rich and poignant. When it first happened and I got these diagnoses, I could see the light of eternity shining through every leaf. I mean, a bug walking across the ground moved me to tears." This kind of guy he was. Strange guy, but brilliant guy. A bug walking across the ground moved him to tears because there is a form of a person even in that bug. Maybe not a person that you can relate to, but that little person crawling across the ground can't relate to you either. But it's life. It has a plan. Something very terrible happened after Terence McKenna's death. It says here that, well, once again, let me just break for 1 second. If you can help, please help, or I can't continue to send you the DVDs. Hidden Meanings, P.O. Box 569, Forked River, New Jersey, 08731. And the email bdona910782000 Let me get on to what I wanted to show you, what Terence McKenna said. On February 7th, 2007, McKenna's library of rare books and personal notes was destroyed in a fire which burned offices belonging to Big Sur's Esalen Institute storing the collection. An index maintained by his brother Dennis survives, though little else. That really is a sad thing. Terence McKenna, a different mind indeed. Through ingestion of psychedelic plants, Terence McKenna felt that the mind was taken naturally into the higher realms of reality, which you would call God. You know the story of Jacob in the Bible, when Jacob's wife traded him to the lady next door for some pot? They called them mandrakes in those days. But Terence McKenna's formula for the 0 point or the omega point, without any knowledge of December the 21st, 2012, figured to December 22nd, 2012. Before we go back to Peter Russell and the movement towards the Omega Point of December 21st, 2012, I wanted to share with you some thoughts of Terence McKenna. A different mind that most people could never accept. But yet, his thoughts might touch a light in you. I think they will. There was something very different, yet something very special about him. And this is what he said. He said, a kind of cultural brainwashing is necessary for modern cultures to work. The consequences of the acceptance of this situation of brainwashing is further acceleration towards catastrophe. There is a great discovery or insight which our culture is deliberately designed to suppress, to distort, and to ignore. That is, that nature is some kind of minded entity. You see what he's saying here? What Terence McKenna is saying, we don't realize that nature is alive. Nature is intelligent. Nature is more intelligent than we are. Okay? That it's not just wind and it's alive and it's intelligent. That nature is not simply the random flight of atoms through electromagnetic fields. Nature is not the empty, the spiritualized lump in matter that we inherit from modern physics, but it is instead a kind of intelligence, a kind of mind. A kind of intelligence. Nature is a kind of mind. There in the first paragraph that we read just then is the need for December 21st, 2012, the brainwashing from the pioneers, the banksters, the profiteers, the corporations, has accelerated us towards catastrophe. And people running around screaming, oh, they're going to have socialized health care. Oh, this is terrible. And then yet they'll pay $1,000 a month to the insurance company for health care. And then when they go to the doctor, the insurance company will send a letter saying, we don't think this is necessary. And what are you going to do about it? It's okay. Oh, this is the way we want it. They control every aspect of your life. So now we've reached the point that the only way that we can eat is to torture the animals to death, and the only way we can prosper is by pouring toxins into the atmosphere. That's why this is our advanced civilization, and this is why December 21st, 2012 has to come along to slam the door. We have turned a violent, profit-driven eye towards a living, beautiful being called nature, an intelligence, a mind. And the profiteers and the banksters, or as the Bible calls them, the kings of the earth, have attacked her, nature. Or as Pakel Votan put it, we have lost our interconnectedness with nature. Indeed we have. And Terence McKenna says this, if the expansion of consciousness does not loom large in the future, what kind of future will it be? Think of that. If there's not an expansion of consciousness that raises our consciousness back into a harmony with nature, what in God's name is going to happen? All of the loons running around, and all they want to do is make bigger and stronger weapons to blow each other to pieces. He says the psychedelic position is most threatening because it is an anti-drug position, and make no mistake, the issue is drugged. What do we mean by drug? A drug is something which causes obsessive behavior. You don't examine your behavior, you just do it. You let nothing get in the way of it. Do you ever see people When they have a special sale at one of these Walmarts, a big thing, they crash through the doors, they even kill the guy with you. They have to do it. They have to have it because they say that you have to have it. That's being drugged. That's being brainwashed. That is a drug that is far worse than the things that we hear about that are smoked or drank or whatever they do. You let nothing get in the way. This is the kind of life we're being sold on every level. To watch, to consume, to buy. The psychedelic thing is off in this corner, never mentioned. Yet it is the only counterflow toward leaving people in designer states of consciousness. Not their designers, but the designers of Madison Avenue and the Pentagon. So what he is saying is that for him at least, and for so many scientists and psychiatrists, philosophers, and psychologists, and they get high to find that light. Here's an interesting position taken by Terence McKenna. It's not the psychedelic plant, he feels, that is the drug. It's not that which destroys the mind and obstructs reality. It's the drug that causes our obsessive behavior. To compete, to get, to do, to listen to the instructions of the politicals and do what they say to do. Go out and march. Go out and scream and yell and do all of these things. And that drug is given to people every day. By the government, by the media, by the corporations. And we're seeing things that we think are wonderful. We're seeing and doing things that we think are patriotic, and they're simply not true. But I like this part. Terence McKenna talks about the apocalypse. And I think it's pretty neat. He said the apocalypse is not something which is coming. The apocalypse has arrived in major portions of the planet, and it's only because we live within a bubble of incredible privilege and social insulation that we still have the luxury of anticipating the apocalypse. If you go to Bosnia, Somalia, Peru, and I'll add Haiti into that, or much of the third world, then it appears that the apocalypse has already arrived. To a large degree, I think the 60s were probably misplayed, but on the other hand, it seems to be the last decade when anything happened. The lid has been utterly on ever since. Isn't that great? Yeah. They're waiting in this country, the religious people, for an apocalypse, and yet the people in Haiti are in the middle of the apocalypse. The people in different parts of the world starving or having bombs. What do you think is an apocalypse when planes fly over and drop bombs on your house? That's an apocalypse. We do that. He still talks about the 60s, and boy, how true that was. Remember we had live television every night, and we had the Sinatras and the Dean Martins, and we had cars with fins in different colors. The last decade, when anything happened. It's like nothing has happened since. A brilliant thought. Let's see what else he says. We're living in some sort of weird hiatus while the people who rigged the game try to send out for new batteries or something. I don't know what's going on. Is that a great line? Because everything is like standing still, isn't it? We run down to buy something, but then we hear about all of these catastrophic things going on. Now while I'm talking about this, they got a situation where politicians are being attacked by people who didn't like the way they voted for health care, and it's like the lady said, don't get your governmental hands on my Medicare. I don't know always what the hell anybody's talking about. And so McKenna says that we're in this, like, sitting on the brink waiting for 2012, and the people who rigged the game are sending out for new batteries. That's a great line. He says there's energy for change building. That's 2012. I think that when it ultimately comes, it will be fairly spectacular. It's astonishing, actually, the way in which change has been halted. Everyone is running around saying, change, change, change. But on the other hand, there's a curious sense in which things have become eerily dreamlike and still, while we teeter on the edge of the end of history, and the same personalities, the same design elements, everything has looked the same in the galleries for 20 years. There's an eerie suspension. Wow. Terence McKenna really had his eye on what you feel and what everybody feels. But no one can quite explain, but you're teetering on the edge, and that's what this 2012 thing is. Everybody comes and goes, and you just inch closer, but you don't know to what. People are arguing back and forth, and they got to prove their side is right, but no one wants to admit anything. Even if the other side is right. You know, the Republicans will vote against something, it's right, as long as it's against the Democrats. And the Democrats will do the same thing. They don't vote for what's right for you. They vote for what's right for them. And as Terence McKenna says, we really do seem to be teetering on the edge of history. Seems like there's nothing more to do. And it seems like those who have been the creative ones, they don't seem to be interested in any creative benefits other than what millions of dollars in bonuses they can amass. And what will they do with the millions and billions? Who knows? There's truly an eerie suspension, isn't there? That's what Terence McKenna says. We are the victims of abstraction. That with the earth in flames, we can barely rouse ourselves to wander across the room and look at the thermostat. Business as usual is no longer an option. There is no Ozzie and Harriet scenario. Is that great? You know, you just want to lay on the couch and change the channel. You know, you get the thing, you just keep see what happens. Once you get up to 250, you start over again. Yeah. There is no Ozzie and Harriet. David and all it is not going to come out that easy. This world where people of privilege defend that privilege with establishments of armament and propaganda as the rest slip into poverty, starvation, desperation, and death. It's one of the things that bothered me so much when they had these arguments about health care. You know, there's so many people sick, no place to go, nothing to do. Insurance companies say, we're not covering that, you can't do anything. But the establishment, the big ones, they just keep grinding along to make more money and make more money and make more money. The establishment is one of holding down panic, keeping people quiescent through drugs which are not psychedelic, through forms of media which are not inspiring, but which are narcoleptic and deadening. This is the fiction that we live in. This is why our situation feels so schizophrenic. You know, that little example in the first paragraph really is so true. We're just standing around watching. We're just standing around waiting. And everybody's just figuring, what do you think's going to happen? But we're not doing anything. When somebody comes along and says, this global warming, oh, you can't do anything about that. You'll hurt the bottom line. And we just lay on the couch, scream our disagreements, and change the channel. There may not be a Ozzie and Harriet happy ending here. You can't spend billions of dollars on health care to help people, but you got to spend that money on armaments so we can drop bombs on people. We got to spend that money to pay off politicians or give out bonuses to executives, the ones that screwed everything up in the first place. And all the while, as we lay on the couch, changing the channel, screaming at liberals or conservatives or politicians, people all over the world slip into poverty, including people here. Or they slip into incurable sicknesses, and needless death. And we take the remote and change the channel and wait for our turn and never question. Is it too serious a problem to cure cancer? Might that cause a problem for the bottom line? Might it put too many people out of work? Might it cut into the profits? Oh, let us continue to make drugs to treat people, but let's not cure that. We can't get rid of that, can we? And that's why Terence McKenna says this: ego is a structure that is erected by a neurotic individual who is a member of a neurotic culture against the facts of the matter. And culture, which we put on like an overcoat, is the collectivized consensus about what sort of neurotic behaviors are acceptable. Isn't that interesting? What sort of neurotic behaviors are acceptable? Well, let's see. We're going to not give people health care, but we'll give people millions of dollars in bonuses. That's well, we won't we won't care about what we give people to eat, even though they're eating antibiotics, like John Hopkins scientists said. Nah, we'll keep turning out, torturing the animals, cramming them together, and then putting them on your table for you to eat the antibiotics. That's kind of neurotic. But you know what? Those behaviors are acceptable to us. And then Terence McKenna says, in the Amazon and other places where visionary plants are understood and used, you are conveyed into worlds that are appallingly different from ordinary reality. There, the compass of your life begins to spin, and you realize that you are not looking in on the other. The other is looking in on you. Meditation, stimulating the single eye, the pineal gland, and you realize there is someone looking at me. Have you thought of any neurotic behavior that's acceptable? Let's pollute the atmosphere with toxins. Okay. How about torturing food animals to death? Okay. How about making huge profits on getting people sick? Yeah, that sounds good. How about selling homes people can't afford and then foreclosing on them? How about dropping bombs on people who haven't done anything to us? How about encouraging large corporations to bribe politicians like the Supreme Court? Oh, yes. You can add to the list. You're not looking in on the other. The other's looking in on you. Terence, we have wandered into a state of prolonged neurosis because of the absence of a direct pipeline to the unconscious. And we have then fallen victim to priestcraft of every conceivable sort. Oh yes, we've signed up for the religious ones, haven't we? We've pledged our money. We show up, and then we read about all over the world they're molesting children. All over the world. And the collections taken up Sunday are going to pay off people for having been raped as a child behind an altar somewhere. And we're told, oh, you've got to wear this kind of clothes, and you can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't do the other thing. We're victims of it. Scared to death of something that doesn't exist because the ones in the robes told us to be. And Terence McKenna says, the only thing I can preach is the felt presence of immediate experience, in which for me came through the psychedelics, which are not drugs but plants. It's a perversion of language to try to derail this thing into talk of drugs. There are spirits in the natural world that come to us in this way, and so far as I can tell, this is the only way that they can come to us that is rapid enough for it to have an impact upon us as a global population. I have some strong feelings about that. I myself, regardless, I would draw the line here. I wouldn't encourage that. I wouldn't take anything like that under any circumstances. But I can understand why the Carl Jungs of the world and Terence McKenna's and so many other scientists did, because they were exploring into different realms that we don't. And it was almost like a medical marijuana thing where it was taken for a specific purpose. But he's right. We are the victims of the religious, call it a pastor or a priest or a rabbi or whatever. We've allowed them to replace Christ consciousness. We've allowed them to replace the quantum force of light within us. And next here, Terence preaches the psychedelic plant experience. And he makes an interesting point. The plants are God-created, and according to McKenna, these are spirits of the divine who come to us in this way. And this is what he says. Pretty interesting. Isn't it obvious that an alien would hide its presence in an intoxication? Yeah, well, yeah, it's true. People see things when they get high, but they don't ordinarily. But is that saying those things aren't there? Is the person who has dementia in the nursing home who's talking to somebody that's not there, can you say that there is no one there? Or is it just a matter that their frequency has shifted to where they can see who is really there that you can't see? Hiding in presence and an intoxication, this is the non-evasive, tasteful, respectful way to have intercourse with other species. You put yourself into a plant. You put a barcode into a molecule. Then the shaman intoxicates himself and he says, aha, it's an ancestor spirit, or it's the soul of the plant. But whatever it is, it's giving me good information. It's telling me where the reindeer went, what the weather will be next week, and who stole the goose and who slept with who. Ah, boy. Think when you see that line where he said, an alien would hide itself and its presence in an intoxication. Think of manna. You've all read the story about the heavenly manna in the book of Exodus in the Bible. You've all read that story. Many believe it was magic mushrooms. And if it was, then what the Bible calls the food of the gods, what the Bible says was put into the Holy of Holies, was a psychedelic plant. Just like Terence McKenna is talking about. Hey, real quick, don't forget the address for your help. Hidden Meanings, P.O. Box 569, Forked River, New Jersey, 08731. If the manna taken into the Holy of Holies was magic mushrooms, then McKenna really was talking to you from a very, very significantly religious base. Let's look at Exodus 16:14, and we'll see what that says. Exodus 16:14, and when the dew that lay on the ground was gone, there lay a small round thing, as small as the hoar frost on the ground. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said, it is manna, for they didn't know what it was. And Moses said to them, this is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat. And Moses says, don't leave any of that till the morning. But they didn't listen to Moses. And some of them left it until the morning, and it bred worms and smelled bad. And Moses was angry. Now what I want to show you, and in light of what Terence McKenna just relayed to us, that what you just saw was the biblical description of the manna as found in the desert. And using that, the scientists were able to come up with an explanation as to what was being described. Let's look. Manna was round, was found on the ground in the dew, would melt to mush if not dried or collected on time, and would breed larvae. All unique characteristics of mushrooms. When dried, it was like wafers of bread, and its color was like coriander seed. The consistency and color of dried mushrooms. So if Terence McKenna is saying that the way for an immediate encounter with the higher is via ingesting psychedelic plants, then the Bible seems to be in total agreement with him. Since the food from God, the food from heaven, seems to be magic mushrooms, the psychedelic plant. No wonder Moses was wandering around for 40 years that place. He didn't want to leave. Even the Bible description gives this particular food a twist. Take a look. Exodus 16:31, and the house of Israel called it manna, and it was like coriander seed. Remember what the scientist just said? Like coriander seed. White, and the taste was like wafers made with honey. Yes. And Moses said to Aaron, take a pot. That's play on words. Put an omer full of manna in it, lay it up before the Lord to be kept for your generations. And had rained down manna upon them and given them the corn of heaven. Men ate angels' food. And after the second veil is the tabernacle, which is called the holiest, which had the golden censer and the ark of the covenant overlaid round with gold, wherein was the golden pot that had the manna. The golden pot that had the manna. And it was to be kept for generations. It was to be kept for generations. It was angels' food. And it was kept in the Holy of Holies, the holiest place. Historian Dan Merker wrote a piece about manna and the use of psychedelics in religious practices. We may want to take a look at. This is what he wrote. He revealed the secret teachings from the Judeo-Christian traditions that promote the use of psychedelic substances to enhance religious transcendence. So what he's saying, this is a scientist, this guy doesn't advocate taking any of this stuff like Terence McKenna did, but he's saying the same thing. How special meditations were designed to be performed while partaking of the psychedelic sacrament. In The Mystery of Manna, religious historian Dan Merker provided compelling evidence that the mysterious bread that God fed the Israelites in the wilderness was psychedelic, made from bread containing ergo, the psychoactive fungus containing the same chemicals from which LSD is made. Many religious authorities over the centuries have secretly known the identity and experience of manna and have left a rich record of their involvement with this sacred substance. And though religious people of today may frown on Terence McKenna's way to enlightenment, it appears the Bible confirms what he has to say. We are so far away from what that Bible said, it is beyond belief. Now there's two final small points I wanted to share with you that Terence McKenna made. And we'll get together with some of his others. But coming up soon, I've got to get to, we're going to get to the seventh tablet of the Emerald Tablets, and a lot of stuff about what's going on in the world and so forth, and we'll get on to that as we're concluding these two sections on the Omega Point. But here's a couple of thoughts from Terence McKenna I just wanted to share with you before we get out of here. He says, my dream from the time I was 8 or 9 was to encounter a UFO because I always had the impression that if you would encounter one, you could understand it. It was maddening to realize that it seemed to have a great affinity for people who lived in trailer parks, but very little affinity for anybody I knew, and so you had to constantly filter these eyewitness reports by people you wouldn't send to the corner store to buy milk, you know. And if you look at some of the stuff on the internet about UFOs, and it's really true. You know, they get abducted out of a trailer or something. I mean, and who knows? He wasn't saying, and I certainly wouldn't say that none of this stuff is true, but the sources are a little bit questionable. But here's something that Terence McKenna says about plants, about little insect animals. I thought you'd get a kick out of seeing. Animals are something invented by plants to move seeds around, an extremely yang solution to a peculiar problem which they faced. An interesting comment on animals and UFOs. But remember something now. We started this year. You've been sitting here listening to this. I hope you've been able to hang on here almost 2 hours. We started all of this talk of Terence McKenna based on his findings that the 0 point or the omega point came down to December the 22nd, 2012, based on the 64 number changes. And the point that was made by Terence McKenna also is that our culture is suffering from being drugged by the system, the corporate system, the religious systems, the governmental system, a system that's totally focused on material things and is causing its own death and destruction. The death and destruction of the planet, the death and destruction of the living beings upon the planet. Terence McKenna figured the omega point to December 2012, and that was startling to him because he didn't know that Pakel Votan, who actually was an alien from the Emerald UFO Force, but he had pinpointed it at December the 21st, the day after, or the day before Terence McKenna had figured his. I wanted to, Peter Russell said in one of his later statements, we could see the whole of our future compressed into a very short time. And he said, perhaps within our own lifetime, we might reach the end of our evolutionary journey. And the growth of human information is taking us to a time when all human knowledge will be instantly available. All human knowledge will be instantly available. Just about is now, isn't it? And he says this will be the global brain. Will be linked into an emerging global mind. Human knowledge will reach its maximum. It will begin to shift. This is what December 21st, 2012 is all about. It's the shifting. Just as the planet shifted from the terrible disruption of the earth and the earthquake in Chile. Did you catch on what just happened here? I just dropped off the planet for a minute. Isn't that funny when you do? Did you ever do that? You're right in the middle of something, and you're talking, and all of a sudden, it's just like somebody starts talking to you. Like you start getting information, and you lose track of what you were talking about. And I just did. That's interesting. But anyhow, what Russell says is that human knowledge will reach its maximum and begin to level off, and the hierarchy of data, information, knowledge, and wisdom will start to mesh. And he says at present, Humanity has vast amounts of knowledge, but very little wisdom. See what he's saying? We know how to mass produce food from animals, but we do not have the wisdom to understand the consequences of what we're doing when we abuse animals. We know how to construct an industrial empire, but we don't have the wisdom to understand the consequences to the natural order. We know how to heal many diseases, but we don't have the wisdom to understand the consequences of withholding healing for profit. Jesus Christ said about healing people, he said, heal the sick. Freely you have been given, now freely give. We know how to build mighty military forces to defend ourselves, but we don't have the wisdom to understand the consequences of forcing that power upon others. We're kind of half awake. That's what Peter Russell said. We believe that, if we just can get the right stuff, we'll be happy. The root of human greed. And that thinking, as Russell said, is at the heart of the ways we mistreat and abuse our planetary home. And this is what he says, and this is borne out by the statements of Jesus Christ. He says our crisis now is a crisis of consciousness. We have great technological power, but we're only half awake. To awaken is not to know in an ordinary sense, but to experience the peace and the ease that lie at our core. And I thought, how can I add to what Peter Russell says here? To awaken is to experience the peace and ease that lies at our core, that lies deep within us. And then I thought, the best way is to explore the teachings of Jesus Christ. And what did he say? He said, the kingdom of God is within you. And he said, seek first the kingdom of God. In other words, what he's saying is inside of yourself. That's where everything is. That's what lies at our core. And you've got to look for it. It's not going to jump out at you. You've got to go. You can call it meditation. You've got to go within yourself and allow yourself to be touched by that photonic light from the quantum realm of universal consciousness. And then Peter Russell wraps it up by saying, because each new phase takes place in a fraction of the time of the previous, we can expect the dawning of the wisdom age to take place in years rather than decades. Humanity will relate to the world in a wiser, more compassionate way. That is what December 21st, 2012 is all about. We can only guess how the marriage of technology and wisdom will play out. We have not been there before. Then comes the omega point. The omega point is a term that was coined by a Catholic priest, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. When the greed connected to knowledge gives way to wisdom, then the marriage can take place. Technology and wisdom. The creative process used to benefit the earth, to benefit all life, including animal life. Then comes the omega point. And so Peter Russell talks about Pierre Teilhard de Chardin coining the term omega point. And he says, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin coined the term omega point. He was a Catholic priest who predicted that the final stage of human consciousness would be Christ consciousness, not in the individual, but in the collective. In other words, what he was saying was not a man coming back, as portrayed in the religious stuff with robes and riding on a horse, but the real return of Christ in the form of the Christ consciousness. And then Russell says just before Chardin died, computers were being developed, and Chardin said they would bring the omega point much closer. If he had lived to see the internet, he would have realized that the omega point would come very, very soon indeed. And so the omega point is brought forth by Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, is to bring all of us to a Christ consciousness, a Buddhic consciousness, a Krishna consciousness. If you can think of Jesus not as a Christian, but as the one who came from above as the Emerald Commander, then you'll be able to grasp the possibility of the second coming, of the omega point. Because what does the book of Revelation say of Jesus? It says, I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end, which is, and which was, and which is to come. Go with me for a minute. Maybe you find this a bit of a trip, but if Jesus was the UFO Emerald Commander, he'd be the Alpha, the first. If he does return at the second coming or the Passover on December 21st, 2012, then he would be the Omega, the Alpha and the Omega. Think, if the Emerald UFO Force landed 26,000 years ago, Alpha, the beginning. The second coming then, 26,000 years later, December 21st, 2012, the entrance into Aquarius, the man with the pitcher of water, the time of the Passover, the omega point. And Jesus says, you'll have the Passover when you see the man with the pitcher of water. December 21st, 2012, the omega point. Jesus' teachings and the teachings of the Emerald Commander were very similar. But what evidence exists, if there is any evidence that exists? Well, what happened? I've gone through much of the teaching of the Emerald Tablets, and what did they say? Well, an emerald detachment landed in South America in Pak El Votan, was pictured in a spaceship predicting December 21st, 2012. What? Yes. It says in the Emerald that a detachment of UFO people from the original landing in Egypt left there and landed in South America, which is the land of the Mayans. And the Mayans made a carving in stone of Pak El Votan, which shows him in a spaceship, just like John Glenn. What else? Well, the Mayan calendar is a wheel of 8. All symbols connected to 2012 are wheels of 8. Now, you'd have to go back in some of the older DVDs that I've showed. But Jesus gave the Coptic Gnostics a symbol which was a wheel of 8. That's the Coptic key, and we've studied that here. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to see it, but in some of the older videos that I've done, we've covered that. Now, how about connecting? Obviously, we connect Jesus to the Bible, but if he was the UFO commander, can we connect that UFO commander to the Bible? That's really interesting because we can. The Old Testament identifies the emerald UFO commander in Ezekiel getting out of a UFO. The New Testament says Jesus left the earth by being carried up. What carried him up? The Old Testament describes Elijah leaving the earth in a UFO. And Jesus says his close friend John, the Baptist, was the returned Elijah, who was obviously an astronaut. Okay? So, if the Old Testament identifies the UFO commander as the same guy in the emerald, and it does because in the emerald it says he had an inkhorn at his side, and in the book of Ezekiel it says the guy that gets out of the UFO has an inkhorn by his side. It's the same guy. And then in the New Testament it says Jesus is lifted up into the sky. Well, something had to lift him up. And the Old Testament says Elijah was lifted up in a fiery chariot, but then comes back as John the Baptist, and he's a friend of Jesus. Well, if he's a friend of Jesus, then Jesus knew that he flew in a UFO. Pretty interesting. I would say, yes. Now, who wrote the Bible? And how, then, would all of this stuff about UFOs get into the Bible? The ancient legend of the Emerald Tablet identifies the commander as Thoth, T-H-O-T-H. That's Egyptian. In Greek, he was known as Hermes, H-E-R-M-E-S. Along came the Hellenists, who were a combination Jews and Greeks, who wrote under Greek authority in Greek mythology. They write the Old Testament, called the Septuagint, and the New Testament. Well, they call the emerald Hermes and Thoth Hermes Trismegistus. And what does that mean? Okay. The Hellenists who wrote the Bible called the emerald commander Hermes Trismegistus, which is the Son of God and three persons in one. Then they come along, and writing the New Testament, they put Jesus in the Bible, and he is identified as the Son of God and three persons in one. So there, the Bible, okay, written by the Hellenists, connect Jesus with Hermes Trismegistus, Son of God, and three persons in one. Now, all right, you can say, I'm just showing you stuff, but it's there. Now, watch this one. Here we have Jesus again, and we're going to look at the Sumerian sign Dinger. Okay. Now, the Sumerian sign Dinger is the 8-rayed star connected to the astronaut Inanna. I don't know, if you get a chance and you read a book by Zecharia Sitchin called The 12th Planet, you'll see a picture of Inanna dressed in a spacesuit. But the interesting thing is, Inanna is connected to Venus, the bright morning star. In Revelation, Jesus says, I am the bright morning star. So we have the connection of the Emerald UFO commander to the bright morning star, and Jesus saying, I am the bright morning star. Now, there's another thing about Thoth, the original Emerald UFO commander, okay? And it is this. Thoth, the Emerald UFO commander's symbol, is a cross and a single eye. Jesus' symbol is the cross, and Jesus said, if your eye be single, your body will fill with light. So that seems to indicate another connection, doesn't it? But here's the one that I like. This is really neat. And I mean, take it wherever you want, and you know things are happening, you know things are changing, you know the 0 point is getting closer. December 21st, 2012 is getting closer. So let's think of this. If the Emerald Force landed 26,000 years ago, which was the first coming, the Alpha, it was the dawning of the last Aquarius. December 21st, 2012, 26,000 years later, would be the dawning of the next or second Aquarius, the Omega. Jesus was asked where the Passover would take place, and he said, look for the man with the pitcher of water, which is Aquarius. And what seems to be indicated is that it would be the Omega point, the 0 point. He was Alpha in the first landing, and he will be Omega in the December 21st, 2012 landing, if indeed that would take place. What's it say? It says, there is evidence to suggest that December the 21st, 2012 is the Omega point, according to Pierre Teilhard-Chardin and Terence McKenna. Jesus would fulfill the Omega point if there was a second coming of the Emerald Fleet at that time. And Jesus said in the book of Revelation, I am Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. Well, it is interesting. It certainly is interesting. And I hope that you enjoy. I can't believe you sat. Did you sit here for the whole 2 hours? Ay. I could go on and on and on. I'm going to let you know when I'll be speaking locally. And then once again, remember now, I can't send you any more DVDs unless you help. And if you cannot afford help, I understand that. And then you'll find some of these messages on the website. All right. Let me give you the address again and the email address if that would help. Hidden Meanings, Post Office Box 569, Forked River, New Jersey 08731. And the email bdona910782000 We had a long conversation here, and I hope you found it interesting. I hope that, once again, you could email me and your thoughts about this at that address, bdona910782000 yahoo.com. Email me. Have any questions, or I'll get back to you. Keep in touch. Support this if you can, so we can keep it rolling, and I get the Hidden Meanings back onto a sound financial footing, which is important. And, the whole, we just have to do that. I don't think we're not raising big buildings and all things that have nothing to do with the message. The message is important. Coming up soon, we'll do the Emerald Tablet number 7, and get some deeper Jesus involvement and talk about some of the things which are going on right now and coming down as we speak. So thank you very much for spending your time, and I'll look forward to seeing you again real soon. Bye-bye.